Picture this: October 12, 1492. Christopher Columbus steps onto a Caribbean beach and claims he's discovered a new world. But here's what they never told you in school. Millions of people were already living there. And Columbus? He wasn't even the first European to arrive. In fact, he might not even crack the top 5. What if I told you that Chinese admirals sailed to America 70 years before Columbus was even born? That Irish monks were celebrating Mass for over 500 years? We've been fed the same story. Columbus, the brave Italian explorer, sailing west to find a route to Asia, accidentally stumbling upon the Americas and changing world history forever. It's a neat, tidy narrative that fits perfectly into textbooks and makes for great classroom posters. But history isn't neat and tidy. It's messy, controversial, and full of inconvenient truths that powerful people would rather keep buried. The Columbus story isn't just wrong. It's a carefully constructed myth that erases entire civilizations and ignores centuries of exploration that came before. So who really discovered America? The answer will shock you, challenge everything you thought you knew, and reveal a conspiracy of silence that has lasted for generations. Let's start with the most obvious truth that somehow gets overlooked in every Columbus Day celebration. America was already discovered. Not by Europeans, not by Asians, but by the ancestors of Native Americans, somewhere between 15 and 20,000 years ago. These weren't primitive nomads stumbling around in the wilderness. By the time Columbus arrived, there were sophisticated civilizations across both American continents. The Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan was larger than Paris or London. The Inca had built roads that stretched thousands of miles through impossible mountain terrain. The Maya had calculated the length of a solar year more accurately than the European calendar Columbus was using. In North America, the Mississippian culture had built cities that rivaled anything in Europe. Cahokia, near present-day St. Louis, had a population of 20,000 people, making it larger than London at the time. They had massive earthen pyramids, complex trade networks that stretched from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico, and agricultural techniques that sustained these urban centers for centuries. But here's where it gets interesting. These Native American civilizations weren't isolated from the rest of the world. Archaeological evidence suggests they had contact with other continents long before Columbus set sail. The question isn't whether America was discovered before Columbus. It's how many times it was discovered, and by whom. Around the year 1000 AD, while most of Europe was struggling through the Dark Ages, Nordic seafarers were already calling America home. The Vikings didn't just visit. They established settlements, traded with Native Americans, and left behind evidence that archaeologists are still uncovering today. Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, led expeditions to what they called Vinland, probably somewhere along the coast of Newfoundland or New England. But the Vikings weren't just making hit-and-run raids. They built houses, forged iron tools, and established what may have been the first European colony in the Americas. The archaeological site at L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland proves beyond doubt that Vikings were living in America around 1000 AD. They found Norse-style buildings, iron nails, and most tellingly, a bronze pin that could only have been made in Europe. But here's the mystery. The settlement was abandoned after just a few years. Why? The Viking sagas tell us the answer, and it's not what you'd expect. According to these ancient texts, the Vikings didn't leave because of harsh weather or failed crops. They left because of conflict with the native population, whom they called Skraelings. The Vikings, these legendary warriors who who had conquered most of northern Europe, were driven out by Native Americans defending their homeland. But the story doesn't end there. Some researchers believe the Vikings made multiple attempts to establish American colonies over the next several centuries. There are mysterious runic inscriptions scattered across North America, from Minnesota to Massachusetts, that some claim are evidence of continued Viking presence. The mainstream archaeological community remains skeptical, but the evidence keeps accumulating. Here's where our story takes a truly unexpected turn. Long before the Vikings, long before anyone thought it was possible to cross the Atlantic, Irish monks were already making the journey to America. Saint Brendan the Navigator, according to ancient Irish texts, sailed across the Atlantic in the 6th century in a leather boat called a curragh. The story was dismissed as medieval fantasy for centuries, but in 1976, explorer Tim Severin proved it was possible by recreating the journey using only materials and techniques available to 6th century Irish monks. But Brendan's voyage might not have been unique. Irish annals mention dozens of monks undertaking similar journeys, seeking solitude in what they called the Land of Promise. Some researchers believe these Irish monks established monasteries along the American coast, living peacefully alongside Native American tribes for generations. The evidence? Mysterious stone structures scattered across New England that don't match any known Native American building techniques, but bear striking resemblances to Irish monastic architecture. Petroglyphs that some claim contain Celtic symbols. And perhaps most intriguingly, DNA evidence suggesting some Native American tribes have European ancestry that predates Columbus by nearly 1,000 years. The Catholic Church has remained strangely silent about these claims. Why would they want to suppress evidence of Irish monks reaching America centuries before Columbus? The answer might lie in the politics of canonization and the carefully constructed narrative of European exploration that has dominated history books for centuries. Now we enter truly controversial territory. Between 1405 and 1433, Chinese Admiral Zheng He led massive treasure fleets across the Indian Ocean, reaching Africa, the Middle East, and possibly even further west. These weren't small exploration vessels. We're talking about ships over 400 feet long, carrying crews of thousands, equipped with the most advanced navigation technology of their time. But here's where it gets interesting. In 1421, British naval officer Gavin Menzies published a remarkable explosive theory that Zheng He's fleets didn't stop at Africa. According to Menzies, Chinese ships reached America in 1421, 71 years before Columbus. The evidence Menzies presents is fascinating and controversial. Ancient Chinese anchors found off the California coast, stone markers with Chinese inscriptions scattered across South America, DNA evidence showing that some Native American populations have Asian ancestry that's distinct from the Siberian land bridge migration. Most provocatively, there are the maps. Medieval European maps that show remarkably accurate coastlines of the Americas, coastlines that Europeans supposedly hadn't seen yet. Where did this geographical knowledge come from? Menzies argues it came from Chinese cartographers who had already mapped the American coast. The academic establishment has largely rejected Menzies' theory, calling his evidence circumstantial and his conclusions speculative. But the questions he raises are troubling. How did pre-Columbian maps show American coastlines with such accuracy? Why do some Native American creation stories mention visitors arriving in dragon ships from across the Western Ocean? Perhaps the most suppressed chapter in pre-Columbian American history involves African contact. The evidence is written in stone, literally. The Olmec civilization of ancient Mexico created massive stone heads with distinctly African features. We're not talking about vague resemblances. These sculptures have broad noses, full lips, and facial structures that are unmistakably African. The traditional explanation is that these represent a Native American racial type that no longer exists. But this explanation becomes less convincing when you consider the other evidence. Ancient American civilizations had advanced knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and architecture that bears striking similarities to contemporary African kingdoms. The Mali Empire under Mansa Musa was incredibly wealthy, with trade networks that stretched across Africa and possibly beyond. Arabic historians from the 14th century wrote about African expeditions across the Atlantic. One account describes Mansa Musa's predecessor sending 400 ships across the Western Ocean, with only one returning. Then there's the botanical evidence. Plants like the yam, cotton, and certain gourds appear in both ancient America and Africa, but evolved separately on each continent. How do you explain identical plant species developing independently on opposite sides of an ocean? The most logical explanation is human contact and trade. But perhaps the most compelling evidence comes from the mouths of the conquistadors themselves. When the Spanish arrived in Mexico, they found black-skinned people already living there. The Spanish called them Black Indians and wrote about their presence in official reports. These weren't African slaves brought by Europeans. They were already established inhabitants with their own territories and social structures. The Phoenicians were the greatest seafarers of the ancient world. From their cities in modern-day Lebanon, they established trading posts across the Mediterranean, founded Carthage, and circumnavigated Africa 2,000 years before Vasco da Gama. Their ships were found everywhere valuable trade goods could be found. So here's the question that archaeologists don't want to answer. If the Phoenicians could sail around Africa, if they established colonies as far away as Spain and Britain, why couldn't they cross the Atlantic? The evidence suggests they did. In 1872, a stone tablet was discovered in Brazil with an inscription in ancient Phoenician. The Paraiba stone describes a Phoenician expedition that was blown off course while sailing around Africa and ended up in South America. The stone was dismissed as a hoax for over a century, but recent linguistic analysis suggests the Phoenician dialect used in the inscription is authentic and matches the time period claimed. But the Paraiba stone isn't alone. Ancient coins matching Phoenician designs have been found in Arkansas and Tennessee. Stone anchors typical of Phoenician ships have been discovered off the coast of Honduras. And perhaps most intriguingly, some researchers claim that certain Native American tribes have genetic markers that match populations from the ancient Middle East. The implications are staggering. If the Phoenicians reached America 3,000 years ago, it would mean that Old World and New World civilizations have been in contact for millennia. It would mean that the isolation of the Americas is a myth, and that human history is far more interconnected than we've been taught. The Roman Empire stretched from Britain to North Africa, from Spain to the Middle East. But did it extend even further? There's tantalizing evidence that Roman expeditions may have reached the Americas, though whether by accident or design remains unclear. In 1982, archaeologists discovered what appeared to be Roman swords in Nova Scotia. The swords showed signs of having been buried for centuries and matched Roman military designs from the 1st century AD. But how did Roman weapons end up in North America? The answer might lie in Roman accounts of expeditions beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the Strait of Gibraltar. Roman writers mentioned ships that sailed west into the Atlantic and never returned. Were some of these vessels blown off course and carried across the ocean by currents and storms? There's also the strange case of Roman coins found in various American locations. Critics argue these could be modern hoaxes or recent losses, but some have been found in archaeological contexts that suggest genuine antiquity. A Roman coin was discovered in a sealed Native American burial mound in Kentucky, buried alongside artifacts that carbon dating places at over 1,000 years old. But perhaps the most intriguing evidence comes from Roman historians themselves. Plutarch wrote about an island across the Western Ocean where Romans could live in peace, away from the corruption of empire. Other Roman writers mentioned similar lands, describing them in terms that some researchers believe match descriptions of the American coast. So if all this evidence exists, if there's proof that multiple civilizations reached America before Columbus, why don't we learn about it in school? Why does the Columbus narrative persist despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary? The answer lies in politics, religion, and national identity. The Columbus story wasn't just a historical account. It was a founding myth for European colonization of the Americas. If Europeans weren't the first to discover America, then their claims to the land become much weaker. The Catholic Church had a vested interest in promoting Columbus because he carried the banner of Christianity to the New World. The Spanish crown needed Columbus to be the discoverer to justify their colonial empire. Later, Italian Americans embraced Columbus as a symbol of their contribution to American history. But the suppression goes deeper than that. Evidence of pre-Columbian contact challenges the entire narrative of Western superiority that justified centuries of colonialism. If African kingdoms, Chinese fleets, and Native American civilizations were already engaging in global trade and exploration, then European discovery becomes just another chapter in a much longer story. Academic institutions have been complicit in this cover-up. Archaeologists who present evidence of pre-Columbian contact often find themselves marginalized, their funding cut, their theories dismissed without proper investigation. The archaeological establishment has created a culture where questioning the Columbus narrative is career suicide. Modern genetic analysis is revealing truths that can't be buried or dismissed. DNA studies of Native American populations show a complex pattern of ancestry that doesn't match the simple land bridge from Asia story we learned in school. Some Native American tribes have genetic markers that match European populations, but these markers appear to be ancient, far older than Columbus or even the Vikings. Other tribes show African genetic influences that also predate known European contact. Still others have genetic signatures that suggest contact with Polynesian populations. The Batacudo people of Brazil, for example, have been found to carry genetic markers that are most closely related to Aboriginal Australians and Melanesians. How did these genetic signatures cross the Pacific Ocean thousands of years ago? The only explanation is ancient maritime contact between the Americas and the Pacific Islands. But the most shocking discovery comes from recent studies of the X haplogroup, a genetic marker found in some Native American populations that's most closely related to populations from the Middle East and Europe. This genetic signature appears to be ancient, predating any known European contact with the Americas. The genetic evidence paints a picture of the Americas as a crossroads of ancient civilizations, not an isolated continent waiting to be discovered. It suggests that human migration and contact across the oceans began much earlier than we ever imagined. Scattered across the Americas are artifacts that don't fit the official narrative. Roman swords in Canada, Chinese anchors off California, Phoenician coins in Tennessee, Celtic inscriptions in New England. Most of these artifacts are dismissed as hoaxes or misidentifications, but the sheer volume of evidence is becoming harder to ignore. The Bat Creek inscription, found in Tennessee in 1889, contains what appears to be ancient Hebrew text. For over a century, it was dismissed as a hoax, but recent analysis suggests it may be genuine. If authentic, it would be evidence of Old World contact with North America in ancient times. In Los Alamos, New Mexico, archaeologists have found stones with inscriptions that appear to be in ancient scripts from the Mediterranean. The Los Alamos stones contain what some researchers believe to be a mixture of Hebrew, Greek, and Latin text, describing some kind of ancient expedition to the Americas. But perhaps the most controversial artifacts are the Michigan tablets, thousands of small copper and stone tablets found in Michigan in the early 1900s, covered with inscriptions that appear to be ancient Middle Eastern scripts. The tablets were quickly dismissed as hoaxes, but recent analysis suggests some may be genuine. Why are these artifacts so consistently dismissed? Because they threaten the fundamental narrative of American history. If ancient Old World civilizations were in regular contact with the Americas, then the entire story of Columbus discovering an isolated continent falls apart. Perhaps the most compelling evidence for pre-Columbian contact comes from medieval European maps that show remarkable knowledge of American geography. The Piri-Reis map of 1513, created by Ottoman Admiral Piri-Reis, shows the South American coastline with stunning accuracy. But here's the problem. The map was created just 21 years after Columbus, before Europeans had supposedly explored most of the South American coast. Piri-Reis claimed he used ancient source maps, some of which dated back to Alexander the Great. Where did this ancient geographical knowledge come from? The only logical explanation is that someone had mapped the Americas long before Columbus. The Vinland map, discovered in 1957, shows Greenland and part of North America with remarkable accuracy. The map is supposedly from the 15th century, created before Columbus sailed. If authentic, it proves that Europeans had detailed knowledge of American geography before the Age of Discovery. But the maps that really challenge the official narrative are the Chinese ones. Ancient Chinese maps show what appears to be the American coastline in detail that wouldn't be matched by European cartographers for centuries. How did Chinese mapmakers know the shape of continents they supposedly never visited? Even today, evidence of pre-Columbian contact continues to be suppressed or ignored. In 2020, archaeologists announced the discovery of what appeared to be a Roman-style villa in Colorado, complete with mosaic floors and hypocaust heating systems. The discovery was briefly mentioned in local news, then vanished from public attention. Official statements claimed the structure was a natural formation or a modern hoax, despite clear evidence of ancient construction techniques. The Smithsonian Institution has been accused of deliberately hiding evidence that doesn't fit the official narrative. Former employees have come forward with claims that artifacts showing pre-Columbian contact have been removed from collections or destroyed. Giant skeletons that might indicate ancient contact with other populations have allegedly been disposed of rather than studied. But the suppression isn't limited to institutions. Researchers who publish evidence of pre-Columbian contact often find themselves professionally destroyed. Their papers are rejected by mainstream journals, their funding is cut, and they're labeled as fringe theorists, regardless of their credentials or the quality of their evidence. The message is clear: don't challenge the Columbus narrative or face professional extinction. Throughout all these debates about who discovered America, one voice has been consistently ignored, that of Native Americans themselves. Tribal oral histories are full of stories about visitors from across the oceans, long before Columbus. The Hopi speak of the true white brother who would come from the east across the Great Water. The Lakota tell stories of boat people who arrived from the sunrise direction. Cherokee legends mention bearded white men who lived among them in ancient times. But it's not just Europeans. Native American oral traditions also speak of black-skinned visitors, of people who came in ships with dragon heads, of traders who brought new plants and technologies from across the Western Ocean. These oral histories have been dismissed by mainstream historians as mythology, but indigenous peoples are now fighting back. Native American scholars are documenting these traditions and presenting them as legitimate historical sources. They argue that just because these stories weren't written down doesn't make them less valid than European accounts. The irony is profound. The people who were actually here when these ancient contacts occurred have been telling us the truth all along. We just chose not to listen. Why has the Columbus myth persisted so long? Follow the money. The Columbus narrative serves powerful economic interests that have no desire to see it challenged. Tourism is a multi-billion-dollar industry built around Columbus sites. From the Caribbean islands, where Columbus supposedly first landed, to the replica ships in Spanish harbors, to Columbus Day parades across America. This is why governments, institutions, and corporations have a vested interest in maintaining the Columbus myth. It's not about historical accuracy. It's about protecting centuries of economic and political arrangements built on the foundation of European discovery. New technologies are making it impossible to continue suppressing the truth about pre-Columbian contact. Satellite archaeology is revealing ancient structures and roads that don't match known Native American building techniques. Ground-penetrating radar is finding buried artifacts in locations where they shouldn't exist, according to the official narrative. But perhaps most importantly, genetic analysis is providing irrefutable evidence of ancient contact between Old World and New World populations. DNA doesn't lie, and it doesn't care about political narratives or economic interests. Advanced dating techniques are also challenging the Columbus timeline. Artifacts that were dismissed as hoaxes because they were too old are now being proven authentic through carbon dating and other scientific methods. The digital age is also making it harder to suppress evidence. Photographs and documentation of controversial artifacts can now be preserved and shared globally, making it impossible for institutions to simply lose inconvenient discoveries. So who really discovered America? The answer is everyone did. The Americas weren't discovered once by a brave Italian explorer in 1492. They were discovered again and again by wave after wave of explorers, traders, refugees, and adventurers from every corner of the globe. Native Americans were here first, building sophisticated civilizations that rivaled anything in Europe. Vikings established settlements 500 years before Columbus. Irish monks may have been celebrating Mass on American beaches while Europe was still in the Dark Ages. Chinese treasure fleets could have mapped American coastlines decades before European discovery. African kingdoms might have been trading with American civilizations for centuries. The real story of America's discovery isn't about one man or one voyage. It's about humanity's irrepressible urge to explore, to cross impossible distances, to make contact with distant peoples and places. It's about the fact that our world has been connected by trade, by migration, by curiosity, for far longer than we ever imagined. But perhaps most importantly, It's about the danger of allowing political and economic interests to shape our understanding of history. When we let powerful institutions decide which evidence is legitimate and which voices are worth hearing, we lose touch with the truth about our shared human story. The evidence is out there, scattered across 2 continents, buried in ancient sites, preserved in DNA, recorded in oral traditions that stretch back thousands of years. The question isn't whether there's evidence of pre-Columbian contact with the Americas. The question is whether we have the courage to acknowledge what that evidence tells us. Christopher Columbus didn't discover America. America discovered the world, again and again, in ways that would astonish us if we had the wisdom to listen to the voices of those who were actually here to witness it. The truth has been hidden for over 500 years, but truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep you bury it. And this truth is too big, too important, and too well documented to stay buried much longer. The only question remaining is, are you ready to let go of the myth and embrace the far more amazing reality? What other historical truths might we need to reconsider? What other voices have been silenced in service of convenient narratives? The story of America's discovery is just the beginning. Once you start questioning the official story, you realize that history, all of history, might be very different than what we've been told. The voyage of discovery isn't over. In fact, it's just beginning. If this story has opened your eyes to the hidden history of the Americas, imagine what other secrets are waiting to be uncovered. History isn't what they taught you in school. It's far more complex, far more controversial, and far more incredible than you ever imagined. Stay curious, question everything, and remember, the truth is always more fascinating than the myth.